welcome home. It's Irish Family History with curious news and notes, celebrating our 4th year of this podcast at the Irish Roots Cafe, where every day's a holiday and there's always room for one more. One of 6 broadcast series from the head school at irishroots.com. I'm Mike OLaughlin, your host, publisher of rare Irish books and information on every county in Ireland since 1978. Be sure to read our blog, complete with links to click on from this podcast, and search our master index and books for free. Molly, wet the tea, Katie, bar the door, Sweeney, clear that floor, and bring out the Irish dancers. It's time we get this show on the road. Well, here we are at the cafe today, and like I promised you, we've got another special guest interview that's going to take over our format today, and I looked high and low for this one, and it's all about Irish blood. Now, you might think that could be a war movie or a mob movie, but remember, we're genealogists here, so this is going to have a lot to do with DNA. We've got a special guest today, like I said, and that's Zlata. Hello, Zlata. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
Well, before we get into the details of Irish blood, could you tell us a little bit about, since everybody here is a family researcher just about, could you tell us a little bit about your family history and your Irish connection?
Okay, certainly. I'm originally from Bosnia. I was born in Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina some almost 30 years ago. And I've been living in Ireland because of the war and everything that's happened in my part of the world. I've ended up leaving Bosnia, moving to France, moving to Ireland 15 years ago. So I've been now here pretty much half of my life. I studied in Oxford in the UK. I did some studies in genetics and social anthropology, and some time ago was taken on as a researcher and a production manager on the production Blood of the Irish, which we're talking about today.
Boy, I tell you what, that must be, you've got to be a real expert to get that position. And, I'm looking at one thing, and, your great-grandchildren might end up changing their name to Max Philip because your name is Filipovic. Well, us researchers into genealogy have seen that happen a time or two where people would chop their name up and just shorten it, and we have a heck of a time finding out who the real family is. So if you might keep the word passed on, it would be helpful for him to keep the original spelling.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it is incredibly interesting, and particularly for certain places, it's made me realize how certain parts of the world are much better in allowing their genealogists and people interested in history some kind of access to information, and certain other places, which is kind of where I come from, would be much, much harder for somebody like myself to trace my family background. So it's kind of made me realize how different places in the world really treat their ancestry, treat their genealogies in different ways.
Well, and how lucky we are to have DNA, which is really like a wild card savior for a lot of researchers.
Indeed. Again, it goes way back beyond those records as well.
So now, if a person comes up to you and says, well, what is DNA anyway? How do you give them a short answer?
Ooh, that's that's an interesting one, because you could start getting all kind of technical.
Yes, a lot of times I'll tell people, trying to get it very simple and very symbolic, I'll say, well, everybody has a series of numbers, and say your great-grandfather was a 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, his son something might have happened, and his number might have been changed to 1, 2, 4, 4, and therefore you're going to trace back to that little change, and that's going to tell you where your family might have originated.
Exactly. We use the kind of phrase genetic marker. It's kind of a little flag post that happens, in involuntarily. It happens, for no reason. It happens because of chance, and then gets just passed on down generation. A little kind of a genetic marker, or a little signpost.
Now, what did you go to different countries or just research different countries' records?
We were basically, we were relying heavily on the research that was done in Trinity College in Dublin. They have a fantastic genetics department. It's headed by Professor Dan Bradley, and they had actually looked into sort of the population genetics of Ireland and had already done an impressive amount of work, which was really revealing into it. And in some stages, they were looking at surnames, particularly they were looking into surnames of Northwest Ireland. They were looking at this hegemony effect, which originally was observed with Genghis Khan in Central Asia, but then there was a sort of a similar effect that was taking place in Northwest Ireland.
Now, explain what that means.
It means that it was discovered that a particular genetic signature was shared by an awful lot of men. Now, one of the things that's, I as a girl, I was always kind of slightly angry that so much more information gets to be found out through the Y chromosome, so that the ancestral lines traced through men actually give us more information. So a particular effect that was happening in the northwest of Ireland is that it was discovered that a lot of men in that region seem to have a same genetic signature, which would imply that sometime way back in the past they would have had the same ancestor. They would all could be traced back to one man. Now, combining surname records, some historical research, the fact that surnames were introduced relatively early in Ireland compared to a lot of other places, it was postulated by as a combination between the genetics department and the history department of Trinity College Dublin, that this one man who lived around 5th century AD was an extremely powerful man. Usually powerful men would have been the ones who would have had more wives.
Now, was that an ONeill?
That was ONeill of the 9 hostages. So an ONeill clan, which then leads us to many different surnames, which still today live in that part of Ireland.
Now, do you remember that they were saying that in a particular area there was, it was astounding, like 6 out of 10 or more were descended from this one man.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a particularly strong signature in that part of the world.
And now the other thing I remember, you'll have to double check me on this now that I'm talking to an expert. That's always helpful. Everybody talks about R1b. If you have that in your DNA, then you're like the oldest part of the Irish traceable line from around the Ice Age?
Yeah, that has then, one of the things about genetics and genetics research is that it's ever evolving. So R1b was a sort of the prime name used for this kind of Y chromosome group, genetic group in that was extremely strong in Ireland. But then it has also then further been developed. So, if you want to keep updating yourself, you could keep adding more other groups that were discovered. Another one was called M222. All these various different signatures. So there is definitely a kind of an Irish specific thing, and as far as the research can tell now. And it was also found out that particular signature, which is Irish, seems to align itself most closely with the genetic signature coming from the Basque region. So that was an interesting thing as well that emerged from the research. It was a kind of a cross-European research that led to that. Obviously, Trinity College, again, were heavily involved. So it's an ever evolving sort of story. So the latest we had was that there was potentially a kind of an alignment with the Basque region. That probably is because the survivors, those who were during the last ice age, the sort of human population of Europe was very small and managing only to survive in one strip of Europe, which was in northern Spain and southern France, which is where we today find these amazing caves with prehistoric art, which was where these ancestor survivors were hiding essentially from and surviving. And when the ice melted, they took off, started populating Europe, moving further up north, eventually making their way to Ireland. But because Ireland remained quite isolated as an island, that early genetic imprint that came in that initial wave remained very strong, and which is why those still living in that part of the world, which today corresponds to the modern-day Basques, is similar to the one that we have in Ireland, which were those original Irish some 8,000 years ago.
Well, yes, and that's interesting because some people had theorized that. I think it was based on language that the Basques were related to the Irish, but it had never really been proven, and so the DNA really helps reinforce that theory.
Yeah, I mean, I think the language, all those things, it's always very hard to talk about this, and one always has to be quite careful how these different strands, because also one of the things that us as social beings today, we always kind of tend to jump towards, links that we feel today and links very much being related to culture or sometimes even politics. So it's always a tricky one to try and navigate and try and sort of say, okay, well, this is what the genetic research is saying. We need to be looking at a completely different set of tools to be looking into languages or into, tools or, pottery or whatever. So all kind of, it's an easy one to get excited and start making quickly links between all these different things, because it's so much nicer to be able to explain something in one fell swoop.
They're doing that with stone tools in Europe and then stone tools in America, too. They're trying to make links based on the flint napping and things like that. What do you think? How about, did you have any connections with the Vikings and what role they might have played in Irish settlement?
Yeah, we kind of, one of the things that, because there's so many different stories, and you could make a kind of a 10-hour series on trying to look at everything. So the Viking connection we sort of touched very, very lightly upon, because it appears that it really didn't leave a very strong effect. Sort of the strongest imprint is that one of these early settlers, the ones that would have been the sort of arisen from the guys hiding in the caves in south of France and northern Spain. So the Viking link, it seems to have some effect in Central Ireland, but it really isn't a very strong percentage. The strongest one is that early Irish one.
Yes, and that surprised a lot of people too. Did you do any looking at the DNA in other countries, like say in Northern Africa?
No, we didn't. We were kind of relying again on some of these, the Trinity College studies, and they were looking, there is sort of this gradient across the whole of Europe, which is looking at anywhere from Turkey over to Ireland, and it's that R1b that we were mentioning earlier. So that was looking at a kind of more European-wide, but we personally, as a series and the research that we put into it, didn't look further beyond that. We were looking at some of more kind of individual stories as well. I mean, the story of people in the West and in the sort of Connemara region, and particularly, this sort of connection that people feel towards, because of the fact that the people in the west of Ireland tend to have this more kind of darker skin, darker hair, dark curly hair. And it was always thought that this was some kind of an Armada connection from Spanish sailors. And so we actually went around the west of Ireland and spoke to individuals just on the street, just to get kind of a feel from people. And they were mostly saying, yes, indeed, we do have here much their looks. And yes, I think it's from the Armada. And then what we look at is it's actually would be something much, much older than the Armada. Armada wouldn't have had that kind of strong an effect.
Yes, from my research, you might have had 3 or 4 people survive in a couple of places from the Armada, but most of them, when they were found, if they lived, they were executed on the spot by the British authorities because they were at war.
Yeah, or even if they had somehow survived and gotten married and had some children, it wouldn't have led to the whole region today, having come from those few men. So that's just kind of quite hard to postulate.
Yeah, it's just another theory of the Black Irish, and people are ready to fight to the death over the meaning of the word I found over the years. Now, were you personally surprised by any specific thing that you found out or that you experienced during this research?
Well, we were quite excited by one thing, which was really the first time this had been done in Ireland, was that we managed to get an extraction of ancient DNA. So this is a kind of a very hard, it's a very hard thing to achieve, because we basically, there were bones of a child from the Bronze Age period that were found in caves in County Clare. And the child was very, in a very ceremonial way. So it must have been some kind of an important child, or it must have been a very sort of a ritualistic burial. And we were quite sort of excited to have been a part of working with the archaeologist who was working in that area, to manage, first of all, to achieve to extract ancient DNA. Most of the time, ancient DNA after, thousands of years does actually deteriorate.
Was this from a tooth or a bone?
It was from the tooth. To be quite good. It was tooth, and there was a fibula as well, a child's fibula. So we managed to get some DNA out, and then the child was, we only managed to get a sort of mitochondrial DNA. So that's a different kind of group that's allowing greater groups. It's not as specific as getting nuclear DNA. But the mitochondrial DNA was revealing that the child was belonging to a particular mitochondrial DNA grouping. And then we were actually looking at working with kids to try and make a connection. So there were kids there who were, suddenly discovered to have had a link with the child, potentially from 3,000 years ago. So it was a sort of a nice little thing. But it was very nice for us to be kind of part of research and actually getting the first ancient DNA out from an Irish bone.
Now, is it true that there's a lot more evidence of humans in Britain than there is in Ireland, in England?
There's definitely an older. I mean, there have been bones found in the caves in Wales, and I mean, literally, we were also filming in Wales. I mean, there's Wales where you can almost, they say that on a clear day you can actually see the coast of Ireland, so it's incredibly close. Yet the bones, the sort of earliest bones and earliest sort of remnants of human settlements in Ireland only take us back as far as 8,000 years ago, whereas in the UK, in Wales, there are 700,000-year-olds. So we have this discrepancy. This is the kind of the great mystery of the Irish. Where did 690,000 years go? How did they never cross over? Have not come across any evidence yet? Has the evidence been there but somehow been destroyed? So it's a kind of a great mystery of the Irish.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Any other notes on any other countries in the Irish that strike you?
Well, one of the things we did, and unfortunately never made it into the program, but it was an interesting part, was also the fact that we went to Montserrat in the Caribbean, where there's sort of several of these islands in the Caribbean where people have, when you land in Montserrat, your stamp is a shamrock.
Yes.
So you are welcomed into this country which immediately welcomes you with some sort of an Irishness. So it was an interesting thing to look into that, although not much research had been done. So that's an interesting element, still worth exploring. A lot of surnames. Are these people sort of descendants of Irish slaves who mixed with, West African slaves? Did the surnames come from, owners, slave owners? What's the sort of story, and why do people still there feel, and why there are certain surnames, O'Gara, Daly, etc., that are still strong in Montserrat, and people feel, this is the only other place in the world that celebrates St. Patrick's Day as a national holiday. So,
yes.
So we went over there and had this sort of. We're very fortunate to kind of be a part of this experience, but it is an interesting one as well. So it's just fascinating how many people around the world are interested in their Irishness. Being a foreigner living in Ireland, I'm delighted to be here because I think everybody always welcomes the Irish. I don't think anyone. It's probably one of the sort of favorite nations in the world. Everybody loves the Irish. I've never met anybody who doesn't. So it's overall the whole experience of looking into this and working on this has been really, really fantastic.
Well, say back to your personal life there, I wonder, do you feel any generic differences between the different countries that you've lived in as far as the feel of the people, that type of thing?
Yeah, this is kind of questions of cultures and, humors and stories and how the way people relate to each other, friendships, family relations. And so I always, for some reason, have felt that there is sort of I felt like there is definite sort of parallels in the way in which people live in Ireland and Bosnia, which is strange. I mean, it's a different way of living. You know, people here live in, everybody has a little house and a garden, and, you know, and most of people in Bosnia live in apartments, and, or my kind of experience has been a different one. But I think there is a sort of an element, warmth and friendliness, which seems to kind of exist in both places, which is really nice.
What can our listeners do to support this project that you just talked about?
Well, I mean, like I said, it's a sort of an ever-evolving story. We have a DVD. We were very fortunate because at the recent Irish Film and Television Awards, we won an award for series.
What about other projects? Are you going to be moving on to any specific projects in the future?
Well, the company that I work for, called Crossing the Line Films, we're sort of doing a lot of documentaries, with often largely with a kind of some sort of an Irish slant. So whether could be historical or, you know, adventure related, but there's kind of always a little bit of an Irish slant to it. So we have, I mean, people can also get the DVD. Everyone's welcome to come and visit our website, which is ctlfilms.com. So www.ctl for crossing the line, ctlfilms.com. So we're selling the DVDs through the website. And also, yeah, so kind of stay tuned for other projects there. There's a lot of interesting stuff. We've had another film out recently, which is actually also out on DVD, about Liam Clancy and the Clancy brothers. So it's kind of it's a documentary about music done by a fantastic director, Alan Gilson.
Yeah, that's a real timely.
Yeah, it is, exactly. They literally just finished it, and we all went together to the premiere in September, and then Liam passed away in December. So it was very, you know, he was very happy to have lived to the day that he actually saw a sort of a theatrical premiere.
Yes, that's great. All too often, nothing happens until it's after the time of the man you're honoring, really.
Yeah, he was, you know, in a tired and not a well state, but he was very happy to see it. And I think that everybody in the company who's worked on that project was so proud of the work, and he was very happy with the film as well. So that's gone on a bunch of film festivals also around the States. It's also available on a DVD here, and also for international customers. Again, check our website, ctlfilms.com.
Is there anything else you wanted to add before we sign off?
No, I just wanted to thank you very much for your interest. I'm delighted that you found out about this documentary, and thank you for spreading the word. I hope people will enjoy it. Yeah, thank you very much.
I think they will. And thank you very much. We've been Crossing the Line with Zlata Filipovic.
Perfect.
Okay. That's all for today, folks. Joseph, warm up those pipes. Remember, we have a broadcast series on Irish song and recitation, on local history of the Irish in America, and on 2,000 years of Irish history, as well as on the counties, and something special coming up on Irish language, I hope. We've got all that and more at our head school at irishroots.com. And you know, we've been known to appear, exhibit, teach, and even sing for your special events. Be sure to book in advance if it's important, and write me at my American address at Irish Roots Cafe, Box 7575, Kansas City, Missouri, 64116. Leave a message by phone at 816-256-3360. Reach me on my webpage at irishroots.com. Skype me at the Irish Roots Cafe. Get me on MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, and Irish Central. Members foot the bill so they get first priority, but we're open to all. And by the way, a big thank you to all of our members. And away.